This is a message for all the enemies of TrueAnon podcast. The haters, the losers, the people who comment on our episodes to say mean things about sometimes when we mispronounce words. Our message to you is this. You can actually pronounce words in any way you want. And in fact, names doubly so, because they're subjective words, meaning that you can kind of add your own funk to them if you prefer. We have hacked into your DDoS systems and have made our way into your mainframe, into your mainframe and things of that nature, such as CPUs, motherboards, and even superhighways, fatherboards, and even GPUs and CPUs as well. I said motherboard, okay. But repeat it, motherboard. Stepmother, yeah. I'm not the stepfather board, I'm the stepfather board that fucking powers your computer. And I'm in it now. I'm in your laptop. Dell, Mac, what are the other? Compact. I'm in all these things. Alienware. From Liz suggested Alienware laptop. Gaming lap. I'm in your gaming laptop for when you ought to go on the road. I'm in there and I see your files and zip drives and Dropboxes and external hard drives and things like that, and even your USBs. I have entered your Android, your iPhone, and the other Chinese one. Huawei. It's not how you say it, though. Huawei. But you know what? That's the message of this program, Huawei. We are a TrueAnon. We do not forgive. We do not forget. We are Legion. Expect us.
Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Come in. Jeffrey Epstein.
Whoa, sorry, ladies and gentlemen. We just had a strange buzzing noise that came from the mainframe we record this through. And then that message, I'm too terrified to maybe take it off. My name, not that. My name, of course, is Brace Belden.
And I'm Guy Fawkes.
Guy Fawkes-Airy.
This is... I just be like, this is Young Chomsky.
This is Young Chomsky.
Who is the producer of this show, which is called...
TrueAnon. Why are you... This is why you fucked up, because you're doing my role.
I know.
I'm the guy who does that.
No, I am the guy who does that.
I am the guy who does that.
I was going to try to do
I've
that.
never seen...
I'm the podcaster who knocks.
I've never seen Breaking Bad, but I love it when he says, I am the guy who does that.
I'm the guy who does that stuff.
You talk about guys who sell meth and who fucking kill dudes and have a little...
Yeah.
I don't know if there's really a
side.
PC word to describe what his little sidekick is there. But who have a white boy who's into rap and emulates aspects of black culture, that's me. I am.
Wait, which is you? You're the white boy who did.
Confused. I am the white boy, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the White Boy Radio Hour, as Liz tried to call the show, but we in fact call it TrueAnon.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, how you doing?
There's the beat you like.
There's the beat we like. We do like to do that. We've gotten into a groove.
We have our little groove, and then sometimes we, mix it up. We flip the script.
Sometimes
and
the
then,
script is for us.
We do a little improv. Mm-hmm. Brace's favorite game that he learned at his classes at UCB.
Okay, well, don't say. I obviously had a really traumatic event happen to me at that.
What are you talking about?
You don't know about the UCB scandal?
The UC Brace scandal?
No. I don't know enough about improv to even make a joke about improv. And aren't they? Didn't their whole thing say? Aren't they always like "and then" or something? Yes, and.
Yeah,
I thought it was "and then."
And then.
And then.
It's just you getting the person to say the next thing.
And then in front of a crowd of 50 people, which was huge.
And everyone laughed.
Everyone laughed. And everyone laughed. UC Brace last night, he was a disaster. And of course, that's when I began cutting, which I will resume Well, you did a sharp inhalation of breath.
I've been cutting.
You've been cutting?
No, I'm done cutting.
You're done cutting. You're bulking now. Well, if you ever want to lose 5 pounds of dead weight, young Chomsky, I suggest cutting off your head.
I was going to say start slitting your wrist.
Whoa, Jesus Christ! You always all right, Liz.
So
you,
we were doing the cutting pun.
That's too far, Liz. Jesus Christ, dude! You know what he? You know
You guys, we have been in this room
for a long time.
It's been a long time.
a long time.
It is now 5 p.m. We have been in here since, I'm going to say 1.
I got here at 1:30.
I
You
have
came
been-
after me.
I did come after you, but I said we as in a collective. Of course, Liz usually takes her individualist approach. No longer.
So you might be like, oh my God, please, I can't believe they're talking about improv. They can't be talking about improv on this show. Wrong. We are kind of talking about improv because we're talking about spontaneity.
Wow. That's a great transition.
Yes, we have on the show today, old friend, returning guest. We love a returning guest, Vincent Bevins, who he was on the show previously, which apparently that was 3 years ago. That's fucking
Wow.
crazy.
Dude, if I had a kid, he'd be in then. Like if Vincent and I had a kid when we did that
Yeah.
kid would be 3
Yeah.
by now.
That's how that works. He has a new book out called If We Burn, The Mass Protest Decade and the Missing Revolution. And he is here to talk about it and sort of try to make sense of various protest movements that defined the past 10 years and how they all failed and why.
yeah. It's a good in fact, I would say fantastic examination of the decade 2010 to 2020 and the tactics used by protesters, the protesters themselves, their aims, and what actually happened.
Yeah, from Brazil to Hong Kong to Ukraine to Tahrir Square and back around again. He goes all over the world, kind of tracking these different protest movements, what they learn from each other, what they don't learn from each other, and everything in between. So I think we should get to it.
Hey, y'all. Welcome to the first episode of our new sort of revamped, sorry, a little nervous getting up here in the talking circle, revamped podcast. It is called, what was it called?
It's called Us Anon.
It's called Us Anon, the world's first horizontalist, totally anti-hierarchical podcast. Kind of everybody gets a voice. Everything is based on consensus. Today we have with us here in the, well, we used to call it a studio, but studio kind of has the letter U in it, so we're just calling it the USEO, which also has the letter U in it, but it's a sort of a different context, and I think that
It's a different U. It's more of like a flat U.
flat U, exactly, sort of a horizontal U, you might say.
And we're going to add the umlaut, which everyone knows feels international.
It feels international, and it represents the two. It represents the yin and the yang,
Right.
Which is what we're all about.
But we're about the meeting of the yin and yang, which makes it complete and
Yes,
whole.
absolutely.
And universal for all. That's a U with an umlaut.
An umlaut. With us here in the USEO, we have author of the Jakarta Method and his new book, If We Burn, The Mass Protest Decade and the Missing Revolution, Vincent Bevins. Vincent, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for thank you very much for having me back.
I actually object to
Surely.
Vincent speaking right now, so I'm going to hold this podcast. Vince, welcome
We
to the
have
show.
to
How you
establish
doing?
full consensus that I'm allowed to start
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
participation. Okay. Good?
Good. Yeah. you're good.
Thank you very much for having me back. Truly, I'm glad.
We're
Glad
so
to be-
excited to have you on. We had you on the show. We were just talking about it. When was it? 2020?
3 years ago, 2020.
That's crazy when you say that out
It was
loud.
the pandemic. I was stuck in downtown Sao Paulo, which was going through a very, very difficult time for reasons we might even talk about now.
Yeah,
but yeah,
probably.
it was, and then, the United States was going through a tough, and a special moment too. But yeah, 3 years ago.
It was, and it was a tough moment in the United States, but we had the revolution, and right now I would say
Comrade Biden is in the White House.
Comrade Biden's in the White House. I'm glad to say that we live in probably the first anti-racist country in human history. And I mean, it must be weird for you to come back, but welcome back to the States. Vincent, what is this book about?
So it is a work of history. It does actually seek to try to tell the story of what happens in the entire 2010s in the entire world, actually. But that's, of course, not possible. You have to, in any work of history, sort of pick what the focus is, pick what you're going to select and what you're going to exclude, sort of guiding questions. And this story is told as if the most important thing that happened in that decade is mass explosions of protests that fundamentally alter the trajectory of certain countries and indeed the whole planet. I think, that works as much as anything else as a way to guide the history of the 2010s. And then the question that organizes the history, although I don't try to answer it exactly directly, is how is it that so many mass protests led to the opposite of what they asked for?
Yeah, you have a quote in the book. See, Brace asked that question, but we both read the book.
We did.
And
yeah,
it
we
is
read it.
fantastic.
Yeah, it's a great book.
I think that a lot of our listeners are really going to really enjoy reading it. You have a quote in the book: "The mystery is not only why this package of contention didn't work, but why we thought that it would," which I think is like a great framing. And you start, I appreciate the fact that you start the book and you say basically like, I'm not going to talk about the U.S., which is refreshing.
Yeah.
As Americans, it's refreshing. And it seems like, if I may, that a lot of this book was born out of your own frustration with what you experienced in Brazil in 2013 and kind of watching all of that unfold. And then, as you say, like why the sort of opposite of what maybe a lot of the people who were taking to the streets, well, we'll talk about that, why the opposite sort of occurred as history unfolded. So maybe we can start there, and maybe we can just talk about what did happen in Brazil in 2013.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. I haven't lived in the U.S. since 2006. I don't know it that well compared to a lot of people that could write books about what's happened here recently. And the way that I look at these particular type of protest explosion, the criterion that I, of course, made up myself. None of, most of the countries that count are in the global south, or at least outside the traditional first world. And you're absolutely right that my deep concern for this topic is personal, like it is for almost everybody that I know that lived through June 2013 in Brazil. Especially people like me that were there early enough to see the very strange direction that it took, to remember what the first protests actually looked like, and not only have the sort of historical memory that has also almost become sort of hegemonic of what they became. So to summarize really quickly, in June 2013, a group called the Movimento Passe Livre, which is a group that was dedicated to full horizontalist practice and also wanted to fully decommodify public transportation in Brazil. So in the long term, they wanted all bus and metro rides to be free for everyone. And they were founded back in 2005. They really grew out of they grew out of Indie Media Brazil, if you remember, like that website.
Yeah, I do remember Indie Media.
Yes, I remember Indie Media. I definitely came up reading Indie Media. And they had always, since 2005, anytime there was a rise in the price of a bus fare, they had organized protests, direct to action, sort of prefigurative protests that would either stop people from paying for public transportation or enter into conflict with the police sort of inevitably. They always did this. Since 2005, they always did this whenever there was a bus fare hike. In 2013, what happens, specifically on June 13th, 2013, they do this so many times that the mainstream Brazilian media and sort of the dominant voices in the country demand a crackdown on this movement. But the police crack down so forcefully that people like me get hit. They crack down so forcefully that members of the sort of respectable mainstream Brazilian media that is owned by oligarchs, and I think coincidentally is not part of the class, these reporters are almost definitionally not part of the class that usually is repressed by the Brazilian military police, or else they would have seen what was going to come when you call for this type of crackdown. The crackdown that comes is so horrifying and creates so many viral images of young, white, respectable Brazilian journalists getting attacked and getting really injured, that the media flips their their narrative entirely. And they go from saying we need to clear the streets of these punks and these anarchists to this is a glorious patriotic uprising in defense of the right to rise up in general. We are affirming our right to freedom of speech and self-expression. And as the Brazilian media flips and sort of tells the country what it's now about, huge amounts of new people enter into the streets. Long story short, some of these people would now be very easily recognized as sort of proto-Bolsonaristas. They're like the beginning of what comes together as the extreme right movement in Brazil.
Different parts of the Brazilian middle class gets involved.
You get sort of beefy white guys that are anti-political coming in with a very different idea of what the protest is than the original like punks and anarchists. The original punks and anarchists try to explain to them like, oh, hey, actually, this is how we're supposed to do it. Like, you're not supposed to just show up and wave a flag and just make it about whatever, like vague nationalism that's very dangerous, that can even lead to fascism. The new arrivals are not only entirely unprepared to listen to a like lecture for some skinny punks that are like, on the left.
They're like, actually, you don't have time. You can't speak right. Yeah, you have to wait until the mic is passed to you.
Yeah,
You didn't
we're
get
here. Our views are
consensus.
valid, which is like ironically what happens to the sort of horizontal group. So many people enter, and they are sort of ideologically committed to not really speaking for anyone or taking leadership in any way, that they have a hard time inserting some sort of centrality in the protest. But long story short, just 7-10 days after this first protest that I'm at, that the crackdown comes, what I would call the proto-Bolsonaristas violently expel from the streets the initial sort of left-wing parties and punks and a lot of the kids that had formed the thing
Very
that had
violently.
existed. Yeah. Well, they physically throw them out of the street and they're sort of dejected and they all decide what to do with that and they go home. But the movement that is reproduced to the country by the major media is very different than what a small group of us remember. And this initial moment of euphoria, there was like this first moment when everybody's coming. And I think I was guilty of this. A lot of my friends were guilty of it too. We interpreted it as like, oh, it's happening. Like I shouldn't have felt this way because
There's like millions of people.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like one of the biggest protests in the world. I mean, like it was massive.
Yeah, it went to 2 million people very, very quickly, and it was totally unexpected. And so sort of understandably, the people that were at the beginning thought themselves broadly sympathetic to the goals of, a better welfare state, better public services. They thought, well, like, this is happening. This is what we've always wanted. And, later, one of the members of I'm paraphrasing one of the articles written eventually by one of the members of the Movimento Passe Livre. He says something like, for 8 years, all we tried to do was create a popular uprising. And then we did, and it was awful.
Yeah.
Because different people came than they expected for different reasons than they expected. And the whole thing just sort of blew up into this sort of profoundly confounding mix of things that me and a lot of other people spent the next 10 years trying to figure out. And yeah, this is sort of, you're right. This is at the core of why I came back to this so often.
Yeah, this story kind of serves as the backbone to the book, it seems, and you kind of come back to it at different stages as you're sort of visiting other cities throughout the world that are kind of other sort of test cases for what you're trying to unpack, as we like to say in the SEO. You mentioned the Bolsonaristas. I'll say the other part of that was a lot of the kind of like liberal middle class that showed up with all good intentions, most likely. But what that kind of, as that unfolds, it's sort of the seeds for what will become Dilma's impeachment. And so you see these sort of two poles of kind of, as we're watching history unfold over this decade, of the kind of middle-class fascists of the Bolsonaristas and the sort of like anti-corruption Dilma, good liberal, and, pro-impeachment good liberals, all sort of unfolding at this protest. It's kind of, I don't know, it's like a little incubator or something for what will become the next decade of Brazilian politics. And as I was reading it, I don't want to spend too much time on Brazil because there's so many other fascinating movements for us to kind of break down here. But the kind of contradiction within the coalition that PT was trying to hold together, this sort of like the working class people and the middle class, that coalition was just going to be untenable. And it was always going to kind of fall apart into something that we see today.
Well, the carpet that is sort of pulled underneath that coalition, which was proved remarkably successful and sustainable for quite a long time. I mean, Lula's second term, he ends with like 88% approval rating. Before June 2013, Dilma is incredibly popular. But the thing that turns out not to be sustainable, and if you look back, it probably never was, is that the way that these people were brought together, and especially the way that the previously very marginalized working classes were brought into a sort of sense of citizenship, a sort of full membership in the Brazilian nation, was through consumer power.
Absolutely.
So it was sort of, there's there's a brilliant Brazilian scholar, Rosana Pinheiro Machado, who calls this inclusion through consumption. And when the second Dilma government falters, when the economy starts to crack, when this consumption power is taken away from the lower middle class, sort of the classic subject of historical fascism, like the petty bourgeoisie, they no longer feel any loyalty to the party that has made their ascension possible in the first place. It's being pulled away from them.
Sure.
They become sort of often like micro entrepreneurs that are very allied with reactionary forces in the country. And in this moment, when Dilma's second term starts to falter, not only because of reaction. I mean, the economy gets worse. This is, it probably was inevitably going to happen. There's some mistakes that are made in the Workers' Party. Forces that are born, forces that learn in June 2013, that they're also allowed to they can also use this kind of the popular sympathy with whatever happened in June 2013. Very cynical, but well-organized, free market, libertarian, often funded by the United States. Think tanks from the United States, one of the major characters who I interviewed, had trained under the Koch brothers here in the U.S.
This
They
is
realized...
the Atlas Network. We've talked about them on our show.
Yeah, very recently.
Yeah, so Movimento, so I explained at the very beginning, this original group of left anarchists is called Movimento Passe Livre, MPL. This group which was at the time Estudantes pela Liberdade, like Students for Liberty, which was like the Brazilian franchise of the U.S. Students for Liberty, which is part of which is funded by the Atlas Network.
Yeah, Liz and I met in uni, we call it, but we met through that.
Yeah. Like they have like fun conferences all around the world. They do effective sort of like social like transfer of like knowledge and things.
Yeah, thus you trained with Moro there.
Beautiful Morrowind.
And within this like cauldron, I think, would you say, the incubator, pressure cooker of June 2013, they decide to make a bid to re-signify the meaning of the streets. And so they form a group called Movimento Brasil Livre, MBL.
So this is smart. They basically see this successful group called MPL. It's getting all this attention.
Yeah.
So they start MBL.
Which sounds exactly the same in Portuguese.
Yeah.
To the point where when I was over the last 2 years telling people in Brazil, I'm interviewing all kinds of people. I'm interviewing Haddad, now the finance minister who was mayor of São Paulo at the time. I'm interviewing the MPL. Everyone would just be like, oh, the MBL. Like they would their brand is now so much stronger than the group that they copied that they actually won this bid to re-signify the streets. So when consumption is taken away, when this sort of I don't want to call it neoliberal, but the way that the PT economic model that had been formulated.
It's like consumption social democrat. I mean, it was like a way for getting poor people's lives better, but it was through this sort of there was a limitation there.
Right. Especially when the economy slows down a bit.
Yeah.
It was built on getting, everybody got better off, including the poor, but the rich got, quite better off too when this all fell apart.
But then they had to suddenly share all their services with poor people.
Well, this was a huge problem too. People were furious in the Brazilian elite that they had to pay more to their maids in the peak years of Lulista economic success. This is a big quote unquote crisis for a lot of people. But yeah, just to get back to what actually happens when this rug is pulled out, this MBL and the liberal middle class and indeed reactionary forces that at the very beginning they're only sort of you can ignore them if you want. Some of the good liberals tell themselves that they don't really matter. Get together to
soccer fans.
Well, the soccer fans go in every direction in Brazil. Ironically, a lot of the scariest ultras in Brazil are pro-Lula and pro-democracy. Like the Corinthians ultras are the, in a real, condition of, street battles, they would probably win. They're, they're on the left probably. They're definitely, pro-democracy. But then the they come together from 2015, 2016, sort of pretending to be the same thing as happened on the street in June 2013, but they have an entirely different set of goals, and they're not horizontalists, they're not leaderless. They're willing to work with elites, and they're willing to take power in any way that they can, and they ultimately did. A lot of these MBL kids enter Congress in the same election in which Bolsonaro becomes president.
Yeah, you have a funny. Your first little nod to Bolsonaro is when you say, "Oh, I'm at Congress. There's all this chaos. It's during Dilma's impeachment."
Right.
And you're like, I got a quote from this guy from Bolsonaro, but he's this fringe character. I don't need to put it in my story. It's
Right.
not going to work. And then suddenly, I mean, that was one of Bolsonaro's big defining moments when he says those awful things about her, and kind of. The stage is set for his, his bid, which is, of course, in the works for a very long time. But the country takes a total total turn.
Yeah.
And like you say, these members from MBL who are very organized, who are very well financed, who are very, like you say, not leaderless, but they're suddenly in power and ready to move. It's a bit disorienting, no? I mean, yeah.
Yes. The years of 2014, like everyone remember, the years of 2014 to 2018 were wildly disorienting in Brazil. Because going back and interviewing some of the members of MPL, in 2014, when Dilma faces off against the center-right presidential candidate, they're horrified that the center-right might actually win. For the first time in there, they're all often they're 20, 22. They're the idea that, oh my God, the right, quote unquote, which is this is not the right compared to what actually comes into power in 2018.
It's like a center-right.
Yeah, it's a party. It's called the Social Democratic Party. It's it's founded by Fernando Henrique Cardoso, which he definitely neoliberalizes the economy, but he comes from a tradition. He's a dependency theorist,
A classic, but
Your classic
Yeah.
South American center-right, I fought the dictatorship, but I think that we need to privatize everything, this kind of guy. And that even to them was they could not believe it. And then when the impeachment started, no one could believe that might actually go through, and then they actually impeached her. And then Michel Temer was actually the president for 2 years, and he had 6% approval ratings, but it just didn't matter. There was
the
demonstrably
unelectables.
there was just demonstrably no support or legitimacy for this guy, and it just didn't matter.
Yeah.
There's no referee that came in and was well, they violated the rules there, and then Bolsonaro just went, and there's this thing after thing just keep I don't know, there's I don't even know if I want to even try to explain what the phrase is, but there's in Portuguese they say the well just kept getting deeper and deeper and deeper. You thought you were at the bottom, you just kept going. So yes, absolutely. It's a long way of saying absolutely it was profoundly disorienting until the point when I was last on the show with you guys. 2020 in the pandemic was insane. It was what Sao Paulo went through under Bolsonaro's governance in that pandemic was literally unimaginable to the version of myself that moved into that neighborhood 8 years prior. There was just it would have been impossible for me to conceive what ultimately happens.
So it's at this point, that you start going elsewhere throughout the world to try to kind of piece together what happened both in São Paulo, but also what was happening elsewhere and why everything was failing. So where do you go first?
Well, personally, I moved to Indonesia after finally wrapping up my posting in Brazil in 2016, and then lo and behold, it's one of these many things that popped up all over the decade. There is what appears to be a grassroots digitally coordinated people power protest. But really, it's just Islamists demanding that the Chinese governor be imprisoned for being Chinese, basically. They accuse him of committing blasphemy, which he didn't, because someone had manipulated a Facebook clip, and they all get together, they all wear white, they all swarm the center of downtown Jakarta. And by this point in the decade, there's a real flip, because back in 2010 or 11 and 12, at the very beginning, which is where I ultimately go to start the reporting for this book, everyone sort of assumed that when the people swarm the streets and the internet is involved, that's automatically a good thing.
It's a progressive thing.
Yeah, necessarily. Necessarily, if the internet's involved and the people are on the streets, that's history. That's Napoleon on the horse, moving us forward towards the promised land of democracy, freedom, or whatever it is that you believe is going to come next. But by the end of the 2020, indeed by after January 6th and January 8th, we think probably the exact opposite. If there's a swarm of people that see a viral post and then, rush on the Capitol for some reason. Eventually when I start working on this book full time in 2019, I go back to where it kind of starts, which is Tunisia.
Yeah, you cover a number of different, I think, pretty notable protest movements that happened throughout the last decade. Starting Tunisia, but also with Turkey, Egypt, South Korea, Hong Kong. But I think starting with Tunisia is important because that was the beginning of the so-called I love calling it the so-called Arab Spring.
I never say Arab Spring straight up in my own voice.
You have
in
to
the
say
book.
so-called.
I say so-called.
You have
yeah.
to say so-called because that
Well,
is
people,
a
a lot of Arab like people that I interview get really mad at me if you just
yeah,
if you actually,
it's a Western a Western appellation or whatever you would call it. It's a Western name for it.
Yeah.
But I think that is we made this point on the show before, and I feel like a lot of listeners probably know this by now, but like. That sort of promise of like digital revolutions, or like this connectivity that the internet was bringing us, and this this proliferation of images, just transmitted from person to person, was going to bring a progressive change. Just like that was that moment, right? That and like the protests in Iran around the similar
2008
time
was
period.
like the real beginning.
Exactly.
That was the first time all my friends put a square of a certain color on their Facebook profile.
Yes, but not the last. I feel like 2020 unfortunately killed that, but hopefully
did,
in like
yeah.
another, when things cycle back, like in another 8 years.
It'll be when we all have our little avatars. We'll all
Yeah.
have to do something.
We'll all
It'll
put on
be-
Kiss
it'll-
makeup.
Yeah, exactly.
So one thing that becomes pretty apparent with the Tunisia stuff is like the promise of the digital revolution, right? Like you get, you have this very viral incident of the I think he's a fruit or vegetable seller, burning himself or self-immolating, and then that bringing a lot of people out onto the streets. In this sort of like, in many ways, like a leaderless sort of just like mass protest movement. In the case of Tunisia, you do point out that there is this Hojaist party, which that's been one of my little factoids, that I know that there's a fairly sizable Hojaist party in Tunisia.
They are not. I mean, they're not huge, but they were involved at the very beginning. The Workers' Party is probably one of many things that without which the Tunisian revolution would not have gotten over the line from a regional rebellion in Sidi Bouzid to something in the capital. I spent a bunch of time with this part of the Hojaist Tunisian Workers' Party. They were a big part of it. The fact that there was a big Tunisian labor union was a part of it. But as you point out, the story that gets told, especially around the world, is more about of Facebook, like media.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas really, if you go and look, these people had been organized and fighting and trying to form networks of people in the interior of brutally neoliberalized Tunisia for a long time. But the thing that really becomes important, especially in the pages of the New York Times or on CNN, is the existence of Facebook coordination and the internet.
And that becomes the actual of all the Arab Spring stuff, especially the early Arab Spring stuff. That becomes sort of the story in the Western media. Is they have these local demands and they're wonderful. We support them, whatever. Or we support the ones that we report about. But really, we're actually just entering this beautiful new progressive age of the internet, which is so funny because that is such the opposite of really the good liberal tack now, which is that Facebook especially, but social media in general is just it's only for misinformation.
Right.
But at the time, it was the new progressive tool, and I think you mentioned I can't remember who wrote this. Some columnist being we don't need it's no bullets anymore. It's we're firing off posts and stuff like that.
Yeah, the Che Guevara of the 21st century is the network.
Yes. Which is, it's just so funny in retrospect. It's not
That's the exact opposite. Yeah, the idea was that the internet was going to Americanize the world, and then especially after 2016, the narrative is that the internet is the vehicle through which bad other countries are conquering America, whether it be Russia or China or
But it is funny because the internet did really Americanize the world.
I think it did.
Yeah,
I think it did.
And something that you take pains to point out in this book is that it really sort of almost homogenized in many ways, or at least drew a lot of these different protests happening in wildly different parts of the world, drew inspiration in terms of tactics and messaging from other protests that were happening across the world too. And so what were some similarities that you noticed between all of these different demands, different people, different places, but similar sort of, I guess you would say, vibes? What are the similarities you noticed between a lot of these movements?
So with the internet, especially social media, I think you did see a kind of a flattening of space and time, which in some ways could allow for this really cool, very inspiring transfer of solidarity from one country to another, contagion of revolutionary elan of spirit. And that's, I think, entirely positive. But like the type of protest that I choose to describe in this book, I think we have kind of already sketched it out, but it tends to be apparently spontaneous, digitally coordinated, horizontally organized, leaderless mass protests in a public square or in public space. And this is very far from the only way that you can respond to government injustice or that you can push for change in a given society. But this became quite hegemonic, indeed perhaps seeming as if it's the only natural way to act in the 2010s. And this really happens after Tahrir Square. So Tunisia, while in Tunisia, you kind of, if you are paying attention, if you actually know a little bit about Tunisia, and again, a lot of the people that showed up from whatever, like, NBC News did not. You could identify, okay, that's that party, that's that union, that's that Maoist like mid-level tendency in that union, which was quite important to flipping them in the final instance. That's the professional society, that's the lawyers' organization. Whereas in Egypt, what you had was when the protests, which again were organized by very dedicated and hardworking activists, some on the radical left, some who really believed in building a party and believed in building a working class power. They did not plan for them to explode as big as they did. So they ended up being able, in a strange position where after the first protest on January 25th, way more people come than they expect. On January 28th, the police like lose control of the city. They like flee.
Yeah.
And they're in a position to do basically whatever they want at that point. But what they do is they take Tahrir Square because in these moments of like revolutionary possibility, you tend to do what you know, and that's what they knew.
Yeah.
A lot of people that I spoke to said, well, I wish we would have done this. I wish we would have taken like over the television station and set up like a revolutionary.
This is all some of my advice. You always want to get communications. You want those unlocked. Block the highways out of the city. No one in or out.
Interior ministry.
Of course, and armories,
Yeah, so there's things they could have done, but what they do is they take the square. And in this square, there is kind of this apparent leaderlessness is kind of, it is fundamental to the configuration of what's going on in the square. You can't really say who's doing it exactly. I mean, if you look closely, the Muslim Brotherhood is probably the most organized group in there, but there's all kinds of people. And then this is the dynamic that really becomes important that you just described. Like, a lot of the people that I spoke to that had been working behind the scenes, like taking huge risks for a very long time, like watched in horror as like a viral post or someone that's good at Twitter or someone that gets selected by the Western media become the de facto spokespeople for something which is supposed to be everyone in the square. And this like scene, which is like undeniably inspiring, like if you rewatch like all these, like the footage and the films, even if you have this like, critical view that I come to the book with, it's like, oh yeah, that is, that you could see how that scene broadcast to the whole world of every kind of Egyptian coming together in the square to call for the overthrow of a dictator, like lesbians and communists and Islamists and like Salafists, everybody's coming together and like breaking bread together. That really inspires quite a lot of other movements around the world. And whether or not they're directly inspired, because like Occupy Wall Street is directly inspired. The Umbrella Movement is a copy of Occupy Wall Street, which is directly inspired. Or in the case of Brazil and Turkey, for example, or even I think Ukraine to some extent in 2013, even if they drew on local traditions of contention, they tend to be viewed by the media, which matters so much to the ultimate outcome of the protests, as the same kind of deal. But like doing the same kind of deal that you would do to overthrow a dictator in Egypt, where quite a lot of the people were for that, really brings up a lot of strange questions when confronted with a democracy, even if it's an imperfect democracy like Ukraine, or if it's a democracy like Brazil, where like actually really Dilma wanted as much as anyone on the streets to keep the price of a bus down. She actually had pushed to keep that down herself. And so the degree to which social media flattens our perception of space and time allows for a transfer of solidarity, but also like the adoption of stuff that looks really, really cool on TV and is represented to the world in a certain way by people like me who should not have been in a position to be interpreting anything for anyone. We did not know, we did not have the sort of intellectual or material resources to be doing that. We had no business, and we failed very often in doing that. And I think all of that has a lot of consequence for the way the rest of the decade unfolds.
I think the flattening you mentioned in terms of social media is really important to this, because so many of these protests almost seem like a real-life reflection of the sort of promise of social media, right? This kind of like this democratization, this direct democracy, which is, don't get me started on that, but one of my most hated little trends that kind of gets brought up very often. But there's like this horizontalism, this like flattening, this democratization that comes from social media is like reflected in these like large leaderless movements, and that's seen in itself as like a progressive thing, right?
Right.
Whatever the aims of the movement are, the fact that like a lot of people of different beliefs are getting together in a central area without any clear direction or leader is itself seen as a progressive thing by the media that is reporting on it, right? And I'm pointing at you, but that's just because I'm making a point. I
was one of them. I absolutely am. I am that. Like that's another part. I mean, go back to what like Liz's like first question. That's like another reason that I put myself in this book is because I think that like I was in a position to know enough about how news is produced to be very critical of the way that like my class, like foreign correspondents, act in these very important moments.
Well, that's really what I wanted to ask, because something that you bring up several times in the book is that like if your movement does not like have its like does not select its own leaders, does not select its own representation, its own spokesman, then the media will do that for you.
Or someone will, yeah.
Someone will do that for you. Yeah, someone will do that for you.
Often the media, often the state, depends who's the most powerful, like who has the biggest microphone in that, you know.
And a lot of times those are one and the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, tell us, like, can you give us some examples of like of what we're talking about here, right? Because throughout the book, several times you do point out like the media selects these spokesmen, or the state will select people to meet with. Why is that? And like, why is that important? Why does it matter that is the thing that's happening?
Yeah, there's a really famous essay that like indeed these Brazilians like pointed me to years ago, but everyone sort of cites it. It's called "The Tyranny of Structurelessness" back in the 70s.
Heavily recommend anybody involved.
It's like
in
2
political
pages. It's
work.
great.
It's really
it's zippy.
wonderful.
It's good. And the basic contention is something that she lived through in I think it was like that would have been called the women's liberation movement as a feminist activist in the U.S. is that when you insist that there is no structure, when you insist that there's no leaders, just no matter how good your intentions are, if the group's big enough, some leader or structure will emerge, but often that leader or structure has not been selected in a self-conscious or democratic way. Often it's just the person with the most like social capital in a small group, or if it's a very big group, it might be the person with the most like financial capital, or with like a really, really big situation, the people with like all the guns and all the TV stations. And so as you said, like in some cases in this book, like in Brazil, the MPLE is like horizontalist. They like really believe in full horizontality. And in other cases, you just kind of get concrete horizontality, which is even though many Egyptians would have loved to have an organized revolutionary party, just like it wasn't there because of the decimation of civil society under neoliberalism and Mubarak. But to the extent that these things did exist, and this is like, Jack Schenker, who was a Guardian correspondent at the time, he talks about this in his book. The prefigurative elements, the ones that seem most structuralist, seem most leaderless, are the ones that are perhaps least productive, but they're the ones that are the most likely to get you a positive foreign media coverage. Because if the people in the square, if you like just like a thought experiment, if like the people, quote unquote, in the square are clearly united behind a revolutionary party of one type or another with clear goals, odds are that's going to be something different than what like CNN wants them to have as a goal.
Yes.
Because this is another slippage that happens all the time, is that the media outlets with the biggest microphones on the planet in the era of like sort of like Americanized internet, U.S. global hegemony, don't understand the like properly third worldist aspirations of a lot of people on the streets. Like if you ask people what they really, really wanted in Egypt, a lot of the time it would be like economic advancement, which would be more like, we want to live like the first world in the sense like we want to be as rich as you.
Yeah.
Whereas often CNN looks at this and they're like, no matter what is happening, it's just like, oh, they want democracy, which means they just want to ally with the United States.
Yeah.
Whereas what they want often is like, no, give us your money. Like the global system is stacked against us. We demand to be accepted into whatever promise that can ever be made to us to be allowed to enter the rich first world. That's what we want.
Yeah.
And then the other side of this strange, this loop of representation and re-representation, the other side of it is like, oh yeah, they want to be like on our side in whatever it is that we want, whatever that means at the time.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about how a lot, going through as you're sort of like breaking down and critiquing all these kind of various movements, that in each instance, they really show the sort of limitations of the historical moment in which they're produced. And so much of that has to do with our early entry into social media, right? And this new technology that I think we were very, I mean, I say we because I don't want to, we're not accusing anyone here, but like that everyone was very excited about. And it did feel like, oh, maybe this can be a tool for organizing. This can be this neutral sort of space that, as if technology can never be neutral or, used in that way. And instead, what we see is it kind of produce and reproduce that same, I don't think it's a coincidence that the kind of networked horizontalism that the structure of the internet produced also produces the social movements that emerge out of it and receive the popularity from it. Like there's that's obviously, there's a bit of a connection there.
Yeah, I think what I say at the end, slightly annoyingly, is that there's an elective affinity between pre-existing ideological currents that like draw on like libertarian or anarchist or new left tendencies. There's an elective affinity between those pre-existing currents and the like material structure, the like built environment of the internet that we get. And again, as you point out, like it wasn't the only internet that was possible. Like that tool could have been controlled and structured in many, many ways. We got an internet that was structured by capitalist firms embedded in California ideology and California and U.S. In the political economy of the United States, and like at like a moment of sort of peak neoliberalism, like who knows how things could have, what if the internet was invented in the 1930s, and the Soviet Union and the United States both had different, on the one hand you had like
absolutely.
a Keynesian internet where they would have never even on the U.S. side would have never considered privatizing it in the way that they did automatically in the 90s, and the Soviets doing, like who knows what Chile would have cooked up if they had been able to continue experimenting for as they were under Allende. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like there was these things combined to create this combination of what did you call it at the very beginning? This
an incubator.
Incubator that you got on the streets of June 2013 in Brazil, and like the kinds of things that popped up in slightly different ways across the decade, and the things that were often viewed in the same way even when they happened in profoundly different national circumstances. And this, like, again, back to Brazil, like, so it's like what I think about the most is like no one knew what to do. Like literally no one knew what to do with what was happening. Like the president didn't know what to do with what was happening. The group that caused this mass explosion didn't know what to do with what was happening. The mayor of no one knew how to respond to this thing that had exploded. And everybody found their different paths out of it. And the right ultimately wins the battle to define the future, or at least the years that come.
Yeah, it's funny because it's almost like there was a mirror between people, Dilma and Empower, wanting the same thing as the people on the streets, and yet both of them, again, in sort of mirror image, not knowing what to do. Yeah. It was a very bizarre situation. I bring up the thing about the technology, though, because I think that, and you don't do this in your book, which I think is good, but I do think there's a tendency when you're sort of like looking back at these things to be like, oh, if you'd only done this, then it would have turned out differently, when it's just not that simple.
No, you have to reimagine an entirely different configuration of political and economic and party forces.
You have to reimagine like the past 50 years.
Absolutely. Yeah. But saying that, I do think that you offer some very potent, we'll say, criticisms of the horizontalist approach. And kind of breaking down why, as we're talking about here. But I mean, you do really, at the beginning of the book, you go back into like the new left, right? Where a lot of these ideas, again, from America, really kind of get cooking in the 60s and then just don't stop.
They just keep cooking up until Seattle 99.
Yeah, and you even go back further to talk about Lenin a little bit and kind of a more centralist approach and what he saw. So maybe we can go a little bit in that direction. Maybe what some of those criticisms are. Maybe
the ones
what
that come out at the very end of the book. Yeah, absolutely. And I try not to. The reason that I try to go in chronological orders, I really want to like show where this comes from and why people decided to take the positions that they did, because it all makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense at the time. And I don't think anybody wants to hear from like me, Vincent Bevins, in 2023 being like, this is what the right way, this is the like logical problems with any given approach to a political organization. We watch what happens over the whole decade, and over that decade, hopefully we like, hopefully if the book does what it's supposed to do, the reader like sees what unfolds along with the actual participants. And
Yeah.
at the very end of the book, I try not to like deliver again these final retrospective analyses in my own voice. Like I try to find the most and luckily there's a lot of them.
They're very eloquent.
Yeah, I mean, they
They
spend
have a
10
lot to
years thinking about
say.
this stuff.
Absolutely.
From Egypt to Brazil to Ukraine, and you get overlapping themes. You get to be wildly oversimplistic. You often see, if not a return to the historical Lenin, like some people come away from this book just being like, read Lenin, read what is to be done. Like go
Yeah.
back to the historical
I think
Lenin.
we've said that on our podcast. Funny
Yeah,
enough.
it's really the simplest solution to most problems.
Some people, that's explicitly what they come back to. Some people come back to something that I could call, again, maybe perhaps annoyingly, theoretically, like a kind of a anti-Leninism, which is like when in the 60s they just tried to reject every single thing that the Bolsheviks did because they didn't like the way the Soviet Union turned out. You end up throwing out a lot of things that work, and if you just define yourself as the absolute inverse of what you thought the mistakes of the Soviet Union were, you're going to end up like really limiting yourself intellectually. You have to, as the MST says, and I spent a lot of the summer with them, and they like ironically not ironically because this was on purpose, sort of I think also provide an eloquent answer to the question of organization, but that won't come out till later this year. But what they say is you have to drink from many fountains. Like you can't just throw out, even if you are the particular type of new left actor that rejected this legacy of the Soviet Union in the second half of the 20th century, a lot of people from that long legacy told me by 2021, 2022, you just can't throw out, you can't just do the exact opposite. Some people end up in the same place. Some people say, like some of the people in the book remain committed to the ideals they had in 2010, and hopefully like, I reproduce also faithfully the reasons that they still do so. But that is that tendency was generalized. The tendency to say, get as organized as you can before the thing happens. Don't try to form something out of the viral post or the moment of heat that is going to get everyone on the streets. Because, across a very, very set of different circumstances in the decade, a general rule for interpreting what happens is that the groups that are most organized and best at real collective action before the thing starts end up doing the best out of it. And real collective action, historically, if you look at it, that often means some kind of decision-making process. That often means some kind of formal structure for deciding on what is to be done quickly. It's very hard to get a group of people to reach consensus all at once about a change in tactics when situations change very quickly. And also, when you are committed to this like total horizontalism that everyone's equal, as the MPL was, they had no idea how to integrate, and this is something that happened with SDS back in the 60s. They did not know how to integrate huge amounts of people that actually came wanting to join their group. Huge, like there was a moment where they were riding really high, and people all across Brazil were really inspired by the MPL, and they said, "We want to join the MPL. We want to be in the MPL." And so there's two options in that situation. They could either create a two-tier system of the MPL, which no, that's Leninism. That's a Leninist deviation. You can't do that. If you were to create a one tier where there are people that, because they knew that their dedication was not something that everybody could.
It's not replicable.
Yeah, like regular people aren't going to go to 14-hour meetings every single day for 6 months. So, but they thought if we formed like these, central committee, or the or just like the
or a vanguard.
Yeah, or if we form the organizing committee, which like the MST is totally fine with having. If we form like the organizing committee, but then like the regular members, like the rank and file trainees, that's Leninism.
Yeah.
But then if we let everybody in, then what is the MPL? Because if you let in 1,000 people, then the original 40 people that have built this thing together for, 40 to 80 people that have built this thing for the last 8 years, they no longer have any say over what it is. It just becomes, the more people that join, it just becomes whatever Brazil is.
Yeah.
I think that across the decade, and I could be repeating myself now, so feel free to remove it, is a generalized tendency to understand that representation of some kind in some kind of structure is probably inevitable. So the task then is just to try to build the best organizations, build the best structures, build the best means for acting collectively and democratically that you can, given the complexity and very imperfect nature of the global society right now.
One thing that becomes pretty apparent in reading the book too is that a lot of these groups, once they realize, because I think a lot of people understood pretty quickly on during the protests that like, okay, like maybe some of these like more horizontalist groups, like we actually don't have the ability to manage this or to get people to sort of join us, and like this is going in directions that we had not necessarily foreseen,
Right?
And that are oftentimes the exact opposite of what we might have wanted, especially in the case of something like Brazil or Egypt. But you make the point is that like if you create a vacuum or if a vacuum comes into being, something is going to fill that vacuum. Right. Like there is no vacuum basically. Like you might have one for a couple of days, but like that's getting filled quickly. And something that I notice is that like, and this is even just beyond what you write in your book, is that like a lot of people on the left, I think, don't take themselves very seriously in like a real way, right? Like there's an allergy to power and to organization that is apparent even on just the level of their own organizations, right? Like this horizontalist sort of tendency that has kind of come out of the new left, but really metastasized in the 90s, and then now is essentially like, even if a organization claims otherwise, often very much at the fore. If you can't be willing to take power, somebody who is willing to take power will. And people are generally not attracted to organizations that seem allergic to power and to seem to not want it. And one thing that I think a lot of people think on the left in America as well is that like if you just blow something up, like that's all you really need to think about. Right. And people don't often actually blow things up. That's actually usually the territory of people on the right. But like if you create as much chaos as possible and you just destroy something, burn it all down, that like something spontaneously beautiful and like wonderful will happen in the aftermath because you were beautiful and you were wonderful in your tactics to achieve that.
Just like one perfect riot, like
exactly.
One weird trick to end history for all times. If we just do the perfect riot and it gets big enough, that's it. That's the end. They're just the end of the movie, and then happily ever after, which is like it sounds like a bit silly, but like as tragically and like stupid as it sounds, and like I'm not trying to be like to shit on people that like risk their lives and things, but like some people were like explicitly inspired by movies that end like that. Like V for Vendetta. I went back and I watched V for Vendetta.
Horrible
which I do like recommend because like it literally just
How's it hold up?
It's crazy.
Because wasn't good at the time. People didn't even like it back then.
But it's so
It's
weird
crazy.
because it was like it had such a like mimetic power. I mean, and you talk about it explicitly in the book, like because there's the kid who puts on the mask and goes viral. I mean, in one of the first instances of virality, like literally goes viral listing these political demands that then get picked up by like Globo or someone in Brazil, and he basically becomes a spokesperson for this.
Absolutely. He defines the nature of the streets to some extent for a few days at least.
Yeah, in Brazil during this movement, and it's just some kid. I mean, you talk to him in the book, and you're like, "Wait, so where did you get those ideas?" And he's like, "Oh, I just made it up."
Yeah.
And it's like, what?
Stuff that he read on Facebook and like on the Facebook feeds of like center right or right wing publications.
And it comes to like define how like the sort of like protest movement like starts targeting the sort of like corrupt nature of Brazilian, this like very nebulous kind of feeling of corruption about the state of Brazil.
Yeah, there's there's an elective affinity totally between the concerns of the center-right media that once they decide that this is a good thing, and I don't think this happens in a conspiratorial way, because I talked to Haddad, who was the mayor at the time, about this, and I was like literally in the newsroom of like the Brazil's
Yeah.
most mainstream newspaper. I don't think this happens in a conspiratorial way, but when they're trying to like supply reasons for why this is a good thing in the like 5 minutes, then like after they said it was a really bad thing, they're gonna come up with things that just like there are their own deep ideological assumptions. Like, okay,
Absolutely, because you're just
corruption-
literally riffing on. I mean, you have the guy like I can't remember which newscaster it was, but
Yeah.
he's like looking at a live
Datena.
poll
Yeah.
where the like viewers are saying that they support the protesters, and he had just been like speechifying about how like the police need to kind of like beat all these people up,
Right.
and he just immediately has to find something in his own little like bourgeois brain
Yeah.
to make sense of it.
Yeah, why is it
on
good?
the fly because
Yeah.
he's riffing like everyone else in the media.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so of course his own ideological biases
I mean,
are going to
this
come
happened
out.
with me. I only spent like one sentence on this in the book, but like over the next few days, people like me had to go like out into the crowd. I mean, had to. This was like the task very stupidly handed to us by the particular configuration of media production and like the global economy. But people like me went out into the crowd and were like, well, what are you here for? What are you here for? Like put a little video together. Dom Phillips, like a friend of mine who worked with me, he was like tragically killed in the Amazon last year. He like went out like for this blog that I was like editing at the Brazilian newspaper. Everybody went out and like spent a couple hours being, well, what do you want? What do you want? And I found very quickly, again, without any of us like, I think not consciously trying to impose our own ideological vision on this, we all came up with explanations that like, oh yeah, lo and behold, it's kind of like reflects what Vincent's politics are versus what Dom's politics are versus
Yeah.
what José's politics are versus what Datena's politics are, which was this, very populist kind of like Law and Order TV personality that was like, yeah, as you said, like in 1 second had to figure out how to, in his ideology, say this is a good thing. And so anti-corruption. So I don't have the numbers in front of me, but before the explosion in June 2013, corruption was listed as the biggest problem in Brazil by like 4 or 5% of people. And this jumps to 21, 22%. And this is something that there is, again, an elective affinity between this one guy in the V for Vendetta mask and the media that like these types of demands more than
Right.
the expansion of the welfare state.
It's
Because
easier
that-
to sell. It's easier to talk about.
and it doesn't cost any money to elites. Just like, want to jump ahead into like a more complicated and controversial uprising, but like in Ukraine, when you ask for like economic
Controversial.
justice and culture war, elites can deliver culture war for free. Economic
Yeah.
justice is going to be a problem for them. So if you have a movement which is asking for both de-oligarchization and some kind of reconfiguration of the national identity or some kind of more formal, let's say, any kind of demand across the planet, indeed, that doesn't require elites to give up any of their money, you're going to get the one that doesn't require
Yeah.
the elites to give up any of their money. And so, yeah, V for Vendetta, I rewatched it. It was like, it's
When did it come out again?
Oh, I think it's like
2008, 2010?
I think it's before 2010. It's like
It
2006,
is.
7, 8, 5. It's crazy.
It's
'cause-
crazy that Natalie Portman.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So wait, you rewatched it?
You should
What?
rewatch it. Well, because on the one hand, in the film, I mean, like some people like the graphic novel. I haven't like people. Some people defend that as much better than the film. I don't know, but it was the film that really was famous.
Yeah,
Come on.
yeah.
And the entire revolution is planned by one guy who just like puts together like shocking, like blow your mind with truth video clips that like he plays throughout.
Viral videos.
Huh?
Viral videos.
Yeah. And then the final scene like. Swarms like huge crowds of like men, they're all like the same height, so they're probably, I guess it's men and women, but like it seems like just like huge crowds of men in this scary masks just march on Parliament, and then movie's over. Like, yeah, that's it. That's the revolution.
But
And
it's
like,
a spontaneous uprising.
yeah, everyone, like one man provides the spark for literally like all of Britain to march on Parliament. And then the way the movie ends is you're led to believe that like that's good somehow. Like, I don't know, like now, again, 2023, you see like thousands of men march on Parliament in a weird mask from a movie they saw because of something they saw on the internet. You would probably think this is quite a dangerous thing that's happening. But no, yeah, V for Vendetta. And like, this is something a lot of protesters told me like very, like very wistfully. Like, we looked too much to Hollywood and not enough of like the very complex and difficult science of like revolutionary history. There was no, like again, back to the MST just because I spent the summer with them. They have like centers of cadre formation where anybody that wants to join, they're like, especially if they're into this kind of stuff, they're like invited to go spend months like reading the history of social movements and the things that work and get trained by people that are around for years and years and years. When everything just comes together really, really quickly, you kind of reach for what's in the air. And in the area of social media, it's often like the thing that gets your blood going, like the thing that gets you all riled up, that like moves to the top of the pile.
You talk about that feeling a lot throughout the book, and I feel like you're a little bit of two minds about it. Maybe because you also experienced it in 2013. And I know that Brace, we've talked about this. that feeling like something's changing or that you're in the throes of history, like that you're in that moment is both. I think you're sympathetic because I think it's understandable that people are drawn to that and find inspiration from that feeling. And it's like a euphoria. It feels like it's unbelievable, but it's also a really dangerous feeling. You can get drunk with it, basically, or drunk on it.
Yeah.
And because it can be the thing that's the only thing you're after,
right?
Or the only thing you know how to chase is that feeling, as opposed to the deep, hard work of actually, studying the movements and trying to build something more sustainable than just the fucking feeling like you're changing something without having the responsibility to actually do anything with it.
Yeah, and in the defense of that feeling, I think that there are tragically few opportunities in like contemporary life to feel like you are really working and you're connected with other people and we're making a difference, because like by all accounts we're not working, we're not in parts of community, we're not acting collectively, we're totally individualized, and like we're not making a difference. Or like this book in many ways like just deals with and sort of arises out of, I think, a real crisis of representation. It's not just that like certain like anarchist-inspired groups wanted to get rid of representation. Like it's clearly not working. So these moments where you can actually feel like, oh my God, me and my fellow like brothers and sisters are like actually changing something right now. That the reason it's so incredibly powerful is because we never get to feel it, and like ideally we should be feeling it all the time. But as you point out, it doesn't mean that feeling necessarily puts food on the table for people in the long term. It may be a glorious victory against the police tonight, but then the police go home and then they just go back to the street the next day. In the case of Brazil, this is again very, very strange. Like the protesters and the police were like going to battle, but like the real forces of power that control things in Brazilian society didn't really care about the outcome, really. It was like, okay, well, whoever wins tonight, like we're going to hire more military police and we're going to use them to reproduce the conditions of capitalism in this country. And indeed, like the mayor who they're like technically fighting isn't actually in control of the police. So yeah, I go back and forth, and indeed like the interviewees go back and forth. Some people say, it can be like a drug in the sense that there's a hangover. And a lot of people, and like I'm very grateful to the people that did sit down with me, because they often shared like going through years afterwards of like real depression or the like sort of PTSD of like what actually happened after that, the initial fever broke, and like, or the people that they realized, that they had lost in one way or another. And so yeah, I actually absolutely go back and forth. On the one hand, I think we need to build a world in which this feeling is more common. But history has shown it has to be part of a bigger package of strategic action and organizational thinking.
Well, what you're describing there is what you mentioned several times in the book, which is prefigurative politics.
Right.
And that's something I've encountered many times in my life. But that there's this I would say, I guess, globalized tendency, although I mostly associate it with people that I've done battle with in political circles over my lifetime, is that like if you create this like perfect egalitarian, I don't want to call it beautiful because I've never seen anything remotely approaching beauty in any of these circles. But this like egalitarian, equitable society or equitable group that is like trying to overthrow the system, then that will naturally follow, and that has obviously borne itself out not to be true. But something that as history has borne that out to be false. I don't know what the fuck sentence I'm saying there, but I feel like listeners know what I'm saying. But one thing that becomes very apparent is that like is that the organizations that these people are fighting against or competing next to don't have any such qualms
Right.
about using, I would say, traditional methods of organization to get what they want.
Right.
And something that you mentioned this in one of the final chapters, but a tactic has been since time immemorial for whatever hegemonic group is in control of societies to divide and conquer the
Right.
people that are against it. And something that is just so fascinating to me since the 1960s, 1970s, really since the New Left, is that has been something that many people who seek to change that society will do themselves already. They're like, we will divide and ourselves as already.
Infinitely.
Infinitely.
Yes.
And it's funny because, people, you hear all this this rhetoric around class war, right? Around class war. But what happens in a war? You fight battles. And what do you
Right.
fight battles with? You fight battles with an army. And how our armies almost have been organized since we began to have structures of organization in society. That is
Horizontally.
with a
Full
high-
consensus.
full consensus, and everybody agrees. Listen, some of the femmes have been talking that some of this has been a little no, but what you have is you have a structure, right? And so much of this, you talk very early on in the book too about how, and we've discussed on this program today, how there's this like weird digital reflection, like the organizational structures that appear mirror in many ways the digital structures that they kind of come out of.
Mm-hmm.
And it's what's fascinating to me is that for the left, I hear many people sort of claim to be scholars of history, right?
Mm-hmm.
Scholars of revolutionary movements. And so many lessons of successful revolutions are disregarded in favor of the sort of ecstatic joy of the 1960s and the lessons of like personal self-fulfillment from that era.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fascinating to me, just this sort of, like what I was talking about earlier, this like allergy to power, but even this like the idea that somebody giving you an order is fundamentally wrong. And what that says about somebody who claims that they want to be part of collective action, to me, I mean, that says that you actually don't want that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you like you end up in this deeply undemocratic in reality, but highly democratic in rhetoric, things like these like popular assemblies where everybody has to give consensus or something like that. I mean, it's fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, like, I think you, absolutely. Listen, like, I'm glad, like, I hope that even the things that are in this book that are like about faraway countries, hopefully they sort of rhyme with sort of experiences that different people have around the world. And sounds like you've had.
I've had plenty.
Yeah.
But even it's funny though, because you talk about how the sort of spokesman, right?
Right.
Will be self-selected or selected by the media. And like, I'm not unaware of the fact that like, just given the fact that we have a podcast
Right.
that is fairly popular, that like somehow we become like de facto spokespeople or whatever. I mean, that's not actually how we view ourselves whatsoever. But like, that is like, it's funny in America, it becomes very grouped along like media consumption lines.
Yeah.
I would say elsewhere in the world, because as kind of like theme of what we're talking about today, everything is sort of is a kind of weird funhouse mirror of America.
yeah.
And
Which
this,
a lot
I-
of,
Yeah, and I think this work, I think like the dynamic you're just describing is really interesting in its inverse too. Because when you have a group, when your enemies are trying to define you,
Yeah.
if you don't have an actual message that you have decided upon collectively and presented as this is our message, like the Black Panther Party would have, like a lot of the original civil rights organizations that inspired the New Left would have, it becomes very easy for your enemies to find the stupidest guy in your
Absolutely.
group and be like, oh, that's who you are.
Which is what they've done with our podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Don't look at me.
What? No, I'm looking at us.
You look directly at me.
I'm looking around the USIO.
No, but I'm sure that everybody who's in a political organization is probably nodding their head, right? Because you have always, I'm sure always the dumbest motherfucker is the one who is like getting pushed to the fore by anybody who's writing about your organization.
And this is incredibly easy to happen when you have like a particular type of street explosion. When the hegemonic media or state forces do not see it as a good thing, they want to discredit it. Now it's incredibly easy to do so. You just find 3 guys that are doing the dumbest thing that you could ever see. You film them doing it. You send the FBI in to do the dumbest thing that you could ever
Well, yeah,
imagine.
there's that too.
And then whatever version of the FBI you have. And
FBI in Brazil? You don't like that?
That is correct. That is
Yeah.
actually right. Yeah, yeah. Like actually, well, I think Sergio Moro would be very like proud of his association with the FBI or something like this. I don't know. Yeah, but it becomes incredibly easy to be like, okay, send, one agent provocateur to like blow up the statue that actually is the coolest, the best guy in your country's history. And be like, oh, that's what the movement stands for. Who's going to deny it? You can't, because like you have no one that speaks for it. So I'm telling you, the media or government of this country, that's who you are. Or you can pick, whatever political tendency you like. You can pick the stupidest 9-second joke from the dumbest podcast that now is extinct and be like, well, that's what that political tendency is all about. And like, who's going to say that it's not? Because unlike the Black Panther Party, there's no one that says, no, this is the community, or like unlike the MST, there's no one that says, the communications sector for the Movimento Sem Terra has like, this is our official position on this. And then like, but that doesn't exist in this particular type of explosion created by sort of globalized neoliberalism and digital media.
Yeah, I don't know if it's like an effect of social media, but one thing I really appreciate about this book is how seriously you present the effect of the media.
Right.
And like, I don't know. Yeah. I feel like even to this day, people don't. Maybe because of social media, everyone either thinks of themselves even in an abstract way as part of the media, or they want to be in the media in whatever capacity they think that means or whatever it is. But people do not take seriously the profound ways in which the media can alter pretty much anything and change the direction of reality itself and what we perceive to be reality itself. I mean, I really do think that. And, you use Brazil as a great example, but elsewhere as well. And I don't know, I feel like people still don't take that seriously enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I think there's a risk of overemphasizing the media and like,
it becomes a conspiracy, like a kind of like, they'll just change. But at the same time...
so at the same time, if you think about it, really, human beings can only see what's directly in front of their faces. Like, the only reason that I know that Joe Biden is the president is because of the media. Like, I didn't go there to like check with I didn't go to the White House to look. Like, the media, we live in such a complex society that we rely on some kind of mediation for everything.
Sure.
And again, because I'm in it, I probably pay a lot of attention to it. And because this particular strange situation in Brazil where the media representation changed not only the way that the world understood, but the actual material configuration of what was happening in the streets, which happens in a lot of cases elsewhere in the book. That, I think, you have to be very careful about it because you can go in weird ways and like because it's everywhere, it can feel like a totalizing force. But like, there's no reason to protest in the first place without the media. There's a reason that there wasn't protests really before the media. It's fundamentally a media action in some ways, I think. And so paying very close attention to like seriously, responsibly analyzing like the political economy of media and who's acting in which ways for what reasons, I think is you can't take that out of the story.
Yeah, I mean, you are very circumspect in the book about your own role as a member of the media, because you've written for mainstream MSM publications, LA Times, Washington Post, as you call it, the WAPO, and your frequent mention of it in conversation, even if you don't need to mention it. But yeah, I mean, do you come out of this like with a re-examination of your own role as do you still want to be a journalist? I mean, like, how do you feel? I'm asking for the Vincent, your heart.
Yeah, I feel okay. No, but it's absolutely true that all of my career has been in sort of the mainstream corporate media. Like everything that I've ever done has come out of like applying those tools to things that I ended up finding while working as a regular news correspondent, whether it was like the thing that was what led me to write about the U.S.-backed mass murder of communists in Indonesia, or to reflect on like the very real failures made by like my class over this decade. But it is like weirdly, ironically, exactly those tools that I like often if you just like almost like naively faithful to the idea of just like saying what really happened, then you end up like in a decent place. And I still think there's sort of an analog. This might sound like a cheap dodge, but let's see if it actually works. I think that there's actually a kind of an analog between the way that you described that if you just blow something up, you think something's going to come around, which is necessarily better. I think there's an analog to the media and being very critical of the ways that it can go wrong. And also thinking that if you just like destroy and all of the people whose profession it is around the world to do their best to tell the stories, that like somehow magically that you'll get like a more democratic or independent media. Because who's going to rush into that power vacuum? Well, there already are oligarchs. Oligarchs are rushing into the decimation of media. Can lead to opportunities somehow if you have like an actual plan as to how to build things better. And some of those projects exist, but just like praying for the full destruction of the existing media, I think is going to open the door for a lot of really powerful bad actors. And like whether we like it or not, and like, you know, setting aside like anarcho-primitivist like options, a really complex society needs representation. It needs some kind of journalism, needs some kind of media. So hopefully what I'm contributing to is the necessary critique of the existing of existing media practice, that just like any state, just like any government structure, just like any order, needs to be constantly criticized in order to be as good as possible. And while I want it to be better, I'm also sometimes skeptical. But again, that might be a dodge because this is my class that I'm perhaps just like deep down defending. But like I'm sometimes skeptical of the cheerleading for the immediate and full destruction of actually existing journalism, because I think what's going to happen is you're just going to get like corporate marketing and advertising pretending to be journalism.
Well, I think a lot of people do want that on like a sort of instinctual level.
Just like
you know
fuck,
what I mean?
Fuck
like,
these guys.
Fuck these guys, because like
which is like
you're
it's
cool.
understandable.
I like you. I can I consider you a friend.
Yeah.
I don't like a lot of journalists, right?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, like it is just factually true, right? Like if there's no media, then like it's just like what, like some Rumble show, us, you know?
It is also factually true that people like don't like polling demonstrates. This is like an empirical fact that like people do like are rejecting like traditional media structures.
Yeah.
They like this is a real.
I would be surprised if network television exists in 10 years.
So I mean, this is
I
gonna.
know people are going to call me crazy, but we're going to be just like streaming YouTube, different. It's going to be diffused media everywhere in any kind of way that you can, streamed like augmented reality in our living rooms, no television screen, of just like some, YouTuber that looks like,
just like
our friend, our little friend, our
like
YouTuber
a hot,
saying whatever we
charismatic
want.
version of someone that we imagine we could hang out with.
Yeah. I mean,
that'll be the next Don Lemon or whatever.
I wasn't saying like, who's going to put us as a slide on us. We're one of the greatest shows in human history.
Yeah,
but I mean, like, to actually be able to do like deep reporting and stuff, you generally need organizational structures.
And like, like you need people to be working full
and
time
resources
too.
and institutions.
Yeah, and this is another thing that like again, as imperfect as mainstream foreign correspondence always was, as much as that even in the like 20th century had a tendency to reproduce neocolonial dynamics and reproduce like narratives which were favorable to the strongest countries in history. Even compared to that, in 2014, 2017, we did a worse job just because we had less resources. So like there was already the ideological problem. And then you had like a bunch of people that like were facing the real possibility that they were going to be fired from their jobs like forever. I think that all journalists like could be fired forever because journalism could like really stop. And this, again, this deepens that tendency. This worsens that dynamic in which the guy that's, happens to be in X country at whatever time is going to say whatever he thinks is going to get him more views, is going to get him more clicks, is going to hold on to his job. Like, in order for people to do this very, very difficult job as well as possible, which is like arguably a job that should not be handed off to the external spokespersons or the ad hoc sort of microphones that are there. But in order to do that job somehow competently, you have to have like several people that really know the history of a given country and have full-time like job stability, which is like not at all what exists at all.
Yeah.
You have a guy that's like, well, maybe if I like say this one thing that I know the editor wants to hear, I'll get $300 from like this one paper in this part of the world. And that has, again, as imperfect as mainstream journalism was clearly in the 20th century, like, in the Cold War, is like my first book goes into this quite a lot. It just got worse, right? Just like a lot of people were like, "Fuck you" to various leaders in the 2010s, but then that initial that very exciting moment when you were like sticking it to them didn't like necessarily lead to something great in the long term.
I mean, I personally believe that I think all journalists just like the UN or like a parallel UN should just arrest most of all of them.
Yeah.
Maybe not like ones that I like, but all of them, and then kind of just let out the ones that like a tribunal. Or
I mean, this
something
is
says
I
okay.
like sort of actually defend the UN-led nationalization of social media. Like I think that
I would be why
I do
not?
think that sort of somehow or another in the long term.
I just think we should have upload caps.
That is, you know
That
what?
literally would just
Yeah.
just like
end
the
a lot
amount
of
you're-
Yeah,
madness.
you
just stop people from.
We need what's the
Well,
the
first of all,
thing
that would be take a revolution at this point
Yeah,
because
yeah.
of there's just too much money
Right.
involved now. But to kind of cap how much people can upload and cap content upload would like dramatically shift overnight. That, and then we ban group chats.
Oh, we gotta ban
That
group
would
chats.
lead to a complete reorganization of society
We
in 1
gotta
month.
ban group chats.
I don't. Yeah, I'm like. Oh well. Yeah, I mean, yeah. The like dynamic that got Bolsonaro elected the first time was like WhatsApp groups.
WhatsApp, being like they're showing condoms to my 2-year-old.
No, they're forcing my 2-year-old to practice oral sex.
Wow.
Yeah, which
Jesus,
didn't
I'm so
happen at
sorry
all. It
to
was
hear
totally
that.
made up. It didn't matter. It still gets your blood going.
Yeah.
You know, still gets that feeling.
Well,
Yeah.
then get my blood going.
No, anger, the feeling,
Oh,
the
okay.
feeling of moral outrage, which is like again, like back in 2011, nobody really knew what made like for a great what was like caused virality, but moral outrage is a thing that really
It's
gets
gotta
people
be.
going.
Listen, it's pedophilia.
I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that by 2023 you have like political tendencies in every part of the world that just like accuse their enemies of being pedophiles because it works. It gets people mad.
Listen, it works, baby. I'll tell you this.
Yeah.
Your book, and I'm quoting a scholar that I very much respect. Your book contains with it a provocation. That scholar's Liz, of course. Your book contains with it a provocation, and actually, really, that's not what I meant to say. I just like to say that.
You just want to make fun of me.
No, I didn't want to make fun. That was literally an actual in tribute, in homage to you. I was not making fun of you.
It could be both.
The L word
Love?
comes up quite a bit. Love. And would you consider love to be the ultimate goal? No, Lenin.
Oh.
Yeah.
Lenin. The impish Russian himself, Lenin, comes up quite a bit in this work. And you seem to, and I don't want to put words in your mouth here.
Sure.
But he certainly comes up a number of times
Right.
in the sort of final 2 chapters
Right.
where you're. I don't know what you would call it. The final 2 chapters of the fucking book.
I think
where you
there's
kind of talk about the general
conclusion
themes of
and
the
then
book.
epilogue, something
That's
like
the
this.
word, the C word, conclusion. The C word, conclusion. And I mean, it's
I'm learning a lot today
we
about
are-
the various
we're learning a lot of
words.
words today. A little punchy. Well, he's great. We love him. But like, is that like something that you kind of came into? Because I of course came into this book already with preconceived notions of like
Right.
this is what works because I can look at history, right?
Right.
I have no great love for Lenin as a person. I just think he was right. And as a person, he was kind of cool. But I just think he was right. It was correct. So I came to this book being like, I know what I believe already.
Right.
And did you come to your conclusion that like it's likely true that Leninist methods of organizing are more effective for achieving and maintaining power than perhaps more individualistic forms of organizing? Did you come to that conclusion throughout this sort of the research for this book, or,
Right.
or like how did you get to that conclusion?
Well, this was a real life ideological evolution that happened among many people that lived through this decade.
Yeah.
So a lot of the people that in 2011, 2012, 2013 are more pro-structurelessness, let's say, end up either being like, no, we need to return to some form of Lenin. I mean, Rodrigo Nunes, Brazilian philosopher, he's one of the guys that's there in 2005. He's organizing a space that they can set up. I don't know if you remember this moment in the anti-globalization or anti-globalization movement. He's setting up a clown school where people can do like street performance as like.
Don't look at me.
Liz is in the 3rd year she won't say this, she's embarrassed. She's in the 3rd year of her grad program at a clown
That is
school.
not
She's
true.
actually been in clown school for the past 15 years. I met her actually at like a sort of Verso clown school soiree.
Right.
The clown loft.
The clown loft, of course, the Verso clown loft.
And he's insistent. He like I understand why he is that. He didn't actually teach at the clown school, but he said he was there when that kind of stuff was in the air.
You will never catch my ass at the clown school.
So he's there when this is the dominant
Yeah.
sort of ideological approach to like mass protests, performance in the streets, prefiguration, like building new types of connection. And he comes, he, along with many other people in the book, come along to, well, what he calls networked Leninism, which is like what was going to be the title for a book, which is eventually neither vertical nor horizontal. Cihan Tuyal, you know Turkish, right? His name is Cihan Tuyal.
Bro, nobody knows Turkish.
I thought you learned Turkish.
Wait, Boris Johnson? I learned how to say Yoldash, a comrade.
So a Turkish sociologist.
Merhaba.
Is that what
That's
is-
hello.
So a Turkish sociologist, I think I'm pronouncing his name more or less, Cihan Tuyal, he's now at Berkeley, comes to we need to return to a renewed interpretation of Bolshevism.
We need everything needs to be renewed, networked, a little twist on the old classics.
Well, we do live in
whatever-
a slightly different world,
Whatever.
right?
I mean, we do live in a different world. Whatever funky little appellations people want to
Everyone's
toss on
got to
that,
throw their little remix in.
as long as it's there.
So this is a real life ideological transformation that happens throughout the decade. A lot of people in different countries, a guy in Ukraine told me I used to believe in sort of self-organization, but now I believe that without an organized working class, elites will always take advantage of a street explosion. He went back to what is to be done. So there's that. There's this a real thing that happens amongst my interviewees, and I understand that in the U.S. this is a provocation. It's a bit spicy, but if it were not, I think for that sort of deep assumption, the deep anti-communist assumptions in U.S. political
Yes.
culture,
Yeah.
the 2010s wouldn't have gone the way they did. The tiny little story that I recount in the book about Malcolm McLaren choosing to make the Sex
Yeah.
Pistols quote unquote anarchist because he tried communism for
The Dolls.
the New York Dolls, and they were like, nope, that's too far.
It's not gonna fly
People
in
got
New
really
York
mad
City.
at us.
Yeah.
People got really, really mad at us when Sex Pistols are anarchists. That's spicy,
Yeah.
but we can take it.
American culture still loves anarchists.
I mean, it's I think there is a deep, deep sort of individualist. Individualism
Yeah.
is at the heart of it. No one disagrees
Everyone
with that.
loves freedom,
Yeah.
capital
Yeah.
F in this
A
country.
particular type of individually defined freedom is at the heart of the American problem. Everyone agrees on that, whether you're
Yeah.
against it or whether you love it. Republicans all agree on that.
Yeah.
And so that's one part of the answer. Another part of the answer is that in order to describe where this stuff comes from, I have to go back to, or at least I choose to. Maybe it was the wrong choice, but I choose to go back to this moment in the '60s where particular students in the United States, growing up in the wake of McCarthyism, choose to employ certain organizational practices as a rejection of, or to be different than what they saw as the historical mistakes of the Soviet Union. So you can't understand, because in the first half of the 20th century, or indeed by even into the 60s and 70s outside the US, what you call, or you say, in the way that you say that Lenin was right about organization, whether or not you agreed with all the other stuff, some kind of a...
I do. But yeah.
Some kind of a Leninist organizational form was quite hegemonic around the world. You had all kinds of movements, whether or not they were actually socialist, adopting the Leninist party form.
It was a party of a new type.
Like Ba'ath, parties had learned in some ways from Leninist organizational forms. Obviously,
Even
that
the
did-
right took, quite famously, the vanguardist right wing, even in America, took a lot of cues from Lenin. Murray Rothbard was famously a huge, he called himself a huge fan of Lenin. Obviously not the...
Well, he was quite substantial.
Anyways, I guess that's the two answers, is that there's a real evolution among people around the world that I saw this happen. And again, in Brazil or in Turkey, returning to Lenin is way less provocative
Yeah.
than
Oh,
here.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
not really...
No one's
yeah.
the Brazil, Lula's government has always governed very closely with the PCdoB, which is a Marxist-Leninist party, hammer and sickle on the flag. Used to be part of this Hoxhaist international tendency, just like the Workers' Party in Tunisia. Even there are of course, rabid anti-communists in Brazil, but the existence of Marxist-Leninists in the political structures of places like Turkey, Brazil, Ukraine, that's not that's not so shocking as it is here. So I knew that it would be a little bit oh my
Yeah.
God, in the U.S., but the book's not primarily about the U.S., and this is a real movement that's, and some members of the MPL have moved in this direction themselves, and other members of the MPL complain, fuck, the young generation of leftists, they're all like back into Lenin now. Like, so it was a real thing that happened outside the U.S. and is not nearly as shocking in the global South as it is in like Brooklyn or California.
Yeah, no, I would say if you travel basically anywhere in the world, you'll find
If you
it's
meet
not-
like Arab leftists or like proper like leftists, like
Yeah.
they're often from communist party families. Not not always, but this exists in a way that we decimated in the United States in the 50s, and it's a real historical exception.
Well, the book ends, spoiler alert, a little bit before or on the eve of Bolsonaro's failed reelection.
Right.
And I would be remiss if I didn't, before we end this fantastic interview that we've been having, didn't ask you about the events of January 8th. And for people listening, we did an episode on that when that happened, but the kind of Bolsonaristas storming of the Capitol, kind of, of Congress.
I mean, they stormed. They stormed the Capitol.
In
stormed the
Brasilia,
Capitol.
very much a kind of weird, both mimetic performance of January 6th in the U.S., but also weirdly of the June 2013 protests, where also the left stormed the Capitol.
Yeah.
There's a weird sort of kind of bookend happening there that sort of traces the genesis of something in June 2013 all the way through to this kind of, I don't know, melancholic, farcical
Right.
attempt.
Yeah, like
that
first
the
is tragedy,
the-
then is farce, then is like really stupid farce.
Yeah, and it's like an even like more clownish, again in
Yeah.
the clown kind of tradition, I suppose, version of whatever that was on January 8th, and the kind of like, just very sad Bolsonaristas. Maybe also somehow thinking that if they too kind of just got there and made something happen, that something would happen.
I mean,
January-
these people
yeah.
were like the most like pathetically and like actually tragically like internet adult guys you'd
Exactly.
ever. Because if you
We
spoke, and I
had that here too, dude. It's the same guys.
well, the January 6th guys, yeah. Like,
But it's crazy to me because it does really feel like this funhouse mirror of June 2013 in a lot of ways.
yeah, I mean, so in June 2013, at this point, probably it was a left started protest. By this point, when they like ran up on top of Brazil's like National Congress building, like you look at photos, like it looks like very futuristic. Like they rush and there's all these big shadows. This happens in June 2013, absolutely, and this is something that at the time the like broader anti-authoritarian left is like, well, yeah, this is an outpouring of support for whatever it is that we started. But functionally, like the actual concrete things that these human bodies are doing in the real world is the same thing. And again, this is like another point that comes up across like the book, like a tactic can be used in many, many different ways. It can be the
Right.
right thing for the moment. It can be the wrong thing for the moment. It can be the right thing used by a bad guy or the wrong thing used by a good guy.
It's an important point, yeah.
And I think, almost any tactic that I can think of is defensible in some instances, right? Like in some instances, everyone defends like violence against like an invading force, or sometimes everyone defends ultimate destabilization.
What
of-
about cheating?
That's a very good question. Like in a relationship.
Yeah. Go on, though. Go on.
No, I'm thinking about the answer to no, never.
Okay.
Never.
Okay,
Never
yeah.
is the answer. If that's the agreement that you have, you don't violate it. No. And so I was in Brazil for the election, and you saw like these increasingly pathetic, the 2022 election that Lula eventually wins, just barely. Even though Bolsonaro does everything he can to try to destroy
Right.
democracy.
Yeah.
Like he
Beyond
tried-
having U.S. support. If he had U.S. support, he would have been able to
Well, he
take
lost.
over.
So I think so. He lost the support of the Brazilian ruling class.
Yeah.
And the Brazilian ruling class is well allied with the that's
Yeah,
I
he
think
went-
I put it sometime in one of the articles like he lost the support of the Brazilian like quote unquote business class or the support of the national bourgeoisie and their international
Yeah.
partners. If you don't have the support of like the quote unquote business elite in Brazil, what's the point of a dictatorship in the first place? Like, why are you going to have a dictatorship
Yeah.
in South America if you're not even helping like the
Exactly.
elites accumulate capital? What are you doing?
Yeah.
So he lost the not all, but a lot of the ruling class. But he couldn't get the support for a real coup because he knows how you really do a coup. You get the military behind the scenes. You get the military to agree to that. You create an excuse. You shut down.
Oh, believe me. Big
There's other
fans of
ways
coups
though,
up
like
in
when
this
we
bitch.
saw the 2014 coup different
Which 2014 coup?
with Doma's impeachment.
Oh yeah,
and-
2016. Sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
you like the content, like the really smart way to do things. The modern coup in Latin America, like even like Pope Francis did like an article about this. It's like you don't like bring tanks up. That looks really bad. What you do is you like find some judicial
Judicial,
Yeah,
yeah,
lawfare.
lawfare.
Yeah, you do lawfare. Yeah,
Yeah.
like Pope Francis is a big guy, like in the lawfare, like
Community.
in lawfare thought. No, like but he was like really, really like Free Lula. This is this is the contemporary way of doing coups, and so all of the real attempts fall apart, and then you get like these increasingly like WhatsApp addicted guys. And I went so initially. They blocked all the highways in the country, which is like that could work. That's a part of an effective coup. That could work.
You got some of your guys doing that.
So that happened in the first days after the election, and ironically, it was like, to some extent, Brazilian football ultras that cleared the roads. Like, like Corinthians is a pro Lula team, a pro democracy team, but then like they're all camped out for like outside of military barracks for weeks, and a lot of them like quite close to like where I just go, I'm like, well, what exactly do you think? And either they don't have an answer, or they have like some rumor that they think that tomorrow
The storm is coming.
the storm is some magical force within the Brazilian deep state is going to arrest everybody and proclaim that Bolsonaro is coming back. And eventually, the fringe of this like extreme right movement decides just to like go, like turn this protest into an attack on the Capitol.
Yeah.
And like I spent a lot of the time, like I spent like the last few weeks actually in Brasilia interviewing like the most prominent like Bolsonaristas in the government. A lot of them, like what they claim now, because like they live in entirely like distinct epistemic universes, they can just claim this as like, oh, that was actually the left. That was all like,
Beautiful.
The left.
Yeah.
It was all like leftist infiltration that was pretending to be Bolsonaristas that did that. Or at least that was a big part of it. So it's not us. It was an our mistake.
That was that's precisely the
American.
same response.
Well,
that,
these guys
like,
pay a lot of attention to right wing like
they're watching
internet in the United States.
The war room.
Well, this is a big part of what I'm working. Yeah, they indeed have like actual conferences where they trade. Yeah, like
Group chats. Shut them down.
group chats. Yeah, group chats. And so you're right. Like and this question came up on the 10-year anniversary of June 2013. Like, okay, well, we understand that like the initial demands were different, but like, what is in a democracy? And again, it's very different when you're dealing with Mubarak in Egypt, right? But in a democracy, what is the actual place for trying to physically eject the elected representatives?
Yeah.
Which becomes, a big problem. And like, again, in Ukraine, like even in an imperfect democracy, what happens after the ejection of the person that was actually put there with votes? And this is I think an unresolved question. Like we're still dealing with like the long tail of the consequence of all of this.
Well, the book is fantastic. If We Burn, The Mass Protest Decade and the Missing Revolution. Vincent, it's so nice to have you in the studio. I'm so happy that we were able to do it not on Zoom.
Yeah, no, thank you. No, truly, thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to it.
Not that we use Zoom, actually.
We used Zoom last time, right? I
It's a
think?
different one.
We do
a different program?
No, that might have been when we had Vincent on. That might have been.
It was like Zencaster? What do you got?
We got one of them motherfuckers.
Zencaster?
Yeah.
Well, no, it's... Oh.
I believe it's Zencaster, yeah, but please don't DDoS us. I actually don't know what that means or how that would work.
No, but it is
But
really...
if you do it with a V for Vendetta mask on, then I'll allow it.
Then you are the de facto leader of the podcast.
Exactly.
You are Comandante V
book
for Vendetta.
Has a lot in it, a lot that we did not cover today. I cannot fathom a listener of this program who, I'm calling it a program now. I cannot fathom a listener of this program who would not enjoy this book in some funky way or all funky ways.
Yeah, there's a lot of really great information.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, thank you very much. Like I tried to, I spent maybe too much time on this book, but I tried to make it like properly a book where like everyone's gonna find their own thing. Like not just be like, here's an argument and then like here's the padding. Like I tried to put a lot in there and hopefully people will bring different things to it and come away with different things at the end of the story.
Well, Vincent, you kind of look like a handsome version of the actor Vincent. He sucks. You know what I'm talking about because you've heard this before, haven't you?
Some people's brains do this because you have
no, dude.
you have
got
It's
You
because
look
it's the
like
same
him.
name.
Wait,
No,
which guy?
You
I know what he's doing. Some people do this. It's a very
Some
it's a very
people
lizard
do
brain
this.
thing.
What are you
Because
lizard. First of all, loaded language.
Wow. Yeah.
Wow.
Wow. Interesting.
Would you say it's a banker brain thing to do?
Does that lizard?
Spent a little
What's
time
that?
in the
What's the
WhatsApp
nose
group there,
look like on
Vincent.
that lizard?
What's his name? No. Who the fuck is that?
I know
Who
what
is
you're. I know
that?
who you're thinking
Vincent Kartheiser?
Wait,
he always
from Mad
plays
Men?
like a shithead. He always plays a douchebag.
Yes. Yeah, dude, he's
No.
famous. No, Vincent.
You don't look like the guy from.
No,
Mad
I'm
Men.
gonna look. He doesn't. I don't. Man, I've never
Are
seen
you
Some
sure
people
his
do
name
this.
is Vincent?
What do you? What a? No.
No, yeah, that's the one.
fuck
Yes, it is.
Vincents are you
I
talking
look like
about?
the cool French Vincent, the French one. But
I'm
people do
Googling
this,
Vincent
but people
actor
only
famous.
say this after they heard my name is Vincent. They never think that I look like
I've
this guy.
known your name is Vincent the
until-
entire time. Okay, famousfix.com.
That'd be crazy if
Actors
you
with
just
the
started
first
going by
name
that.
Vincent. Vince Neil? No. A little bit. You got a Vince Neil thing to you, but Vincent Gallo, I would say politically, but not physically. Vincent D'Onofrio.
D'Onofrio,
Oh, Law and Order.
Law and Order,
This
yeah.
list is only 3 people long. No, dude, he's the most famous guy named Vincent besides Van Gogh.
But then how come he doesn't come up on Google?
Yeah.
Wait, I'm looking like
I kn-
Vincent.
do you know why the answer is? It's because his name is Vince. I know. I think
Vincent,
people call him Vince. If you put actor Vince, I know where you're going, and I don't like
Vince
it.
Vaughn.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, he looks like a.
It's like I said. It's just because of the word. His
I don't
brain.
think
That's
it's
how the
like-
human
No, I
brain
don't
works.
You look
see
like
it.
a handsome
You're
Vince Vaughn.
You're associating the word. It's just the word.
No, you got.
You
the
think it's a
chin.
coincidence that I'm one of like 6 people you've ever seen that has the name Vincent? That
What
you
are you
think
talking about? I used to live with Vinnie Martini.
so 7?
Vincent? I know so many Vincents.
Okay,
6 people?
14. I don't know.
14. Whoa.
A lot of Filipinos are named Vincent.
A lot of Filipinos named Vincent. We didn't even talk about the Philippines. But
So yeah, but I think it's because of my name. But whatever. Yeah.
Well, I love
I'm
your
not, I don't
name.
live inside your brains.
and I love you and I love the book.
Thank you.
And I love that you came on the program.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And with that being said, Vincent, farewell.
Well, Bruce, what did you learn today?
What did we learn? Well, I think if you get enough people in one place, then something happens.
Yeah. And if you have a mask that looks kind of like a clown, but a little bit more twisted, a dark clown with like a twisted smile, you can get on the internet.
You should have seen, ladies and gentlemen, you should have seen the contortions which Liz's body went into. It was almost like she had stuck a fork in an electric socket when the clown school came up. I have never seen somebody shrink. I would say Liz became 3 inches by 3 inches at that point. And then she exploded, much like a sort of a Jack-in-the-Box type scenario.
You know, you make fun of me, but I trained with the former president of Clowns of America.
Ow. Sorry, Liz just fucking had me smell a flower and then it had water in it.
I
dude.
didn't do that.
Oh.
You know, we don't need to get into my cloning work.
Well, I mean, you trained with the former president of the Clowns of America?
I take a pie real well.
I didn't know you were in Congress.
Oh my God.
Yeah. It's just, a piece of gum? Oh, this nothing bad could happen. Ow. Wait, Liz, thank God. I'm so hungry. You're offering me peanuts? Oh, well, only peanuts could be. Oh my God, a snake! And thus ends that.
I'm Liz.
My name is Brace. Of course, we are joined by the shirtless but 2 pairs of pants, producer Young Chomsky, and the podcast is called
TrueAnon. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.